Now, a couple of decades ago, I designed and built this case just out of scrap wood that I had laying around, because the old cardboard box that I had it in was disintegrating. And I'd also gone out and purchased a whole new set of track for it, because the old track was getting kind of rusty and wasn't making good electrical contact. So I can keep the whole set of new track on this half, and if I lift out the cardboard partition down here, there's a lower level that has all the original track, which I'm just keeping for posterity, or if I ever sell this, some collector might wish to have the original track. You know, they make track now that's exactly the same as the original as far as I can tell. This is Lionel track. The original was Marx, but you can't hardly tell the difference. They're just the same. So I'm going to close this for the moment. Flip her around. And here's the side with the train. And what do I have inside this envelope? I don't even remember. Various documents. Oh, this is for the lubricator kit that I bought for it. And this is an old Marx spare parts, you know, and car ordering form. Quite old. I'd at one point figured out the electrical schematic of the locomotive. An old instructions for the transformer. Now this is vintage here. I think this one came when the old transformer, the original one, burned out. I was still a kid. I'm pretty sure this was right when we moved from Japan back to the States very briefly, before moving to Germany for quite a long time. And this train was in storage, and I hadn't played with it since I was, you know, like in kindergarten or something. So we took it out and tried using it, and the transformer burned up for whatever reason. And Marx was, I think, either based in St. Louis, or they had a big facility in St. Louis, and we were near St. Louis. So my dad actually went over there and bought a replacement transformer. And this was, I'm pretty sure, the book that came with that one, but that would have been still in the, you know, probably like 69 or something like that. There's the original vintage instructions for the coupling, automatic uncoupling unit. And then some receipts. And this was probably something I did when I was a teenager. I had made up a favorite track layout and sketched it out on the back of some computer form tractor feed paper. And here's a not so old, about 18 years old, from the Robert Grossman company, who I had ordered some parts for. They made, I presume are still around, making, yeah, Robert Grossman Company, Richmond Heights, Ohio, a whole bunch of parts for Marx trains. And then more correspondence. And this is a vintage document that was always with the train as long as I can remember. It had a whole bunch of sample track layouts that a kid might wish to build. And I presume this is old too. This has some instructions for remote control switches. So that's the documentation I have. Okay, so a brief inventory of what's in here. I have a spare light bulb for the locomotive. I don't even know what that is. Some little piece of hardware. Oh, it's a rail cleaner. That's what it is. It's some sort of device used to clean the rails, and there's sort of an eraser that's part of it. A Lionel lock-on device to apply power to the tracks. And another one of them. These are just spare parts. There are a couple of old signs saying where the decoupler is. These are vintage. They came with the train. This is the original switch. As far as I know, it still works, but it hasn't been powered up in a long time. And at some point later, I bought this similar one, but one that it goes in the other direction. And this was a Marx, but it's got a plastic base and a plastic housing for the magnet, whereas the original one was all metal. And then I have a corresponding plastic one that goes the other direction. So neither of those plastic ones were with the train set originally. And then at some point, I had this when I was a teenager. It was a crossover. Got a lot of use. And this is a newer control panel for the switches. And all these cardboard partitions are original. They're the ones that were with it originally. And I just moved them from the original cardboard box. Anyway, this is the original switch controller. Controls 2 switches. Same circuit as this plastic one, just I think nicer. So there's that. And then I have essentially 3 locomotives in here, plus a couple more sections of track that probably didn't fit on the other side. This is the original locomotive that came with the set. It's in good condition. $391. Pretty sure that's its designator. It's in real good condition. As far as I know, it still works fine. At one point it stopped working because my dad had re-lubricated it, and I probably didn't mention that I got this from my dad. It was his childhood toy. I think he got it sometime around World War II. I'm not sure if he got it new or used, but he played with it a lot, and then it became mine when I was probably around kindergarten. He gave it to me, but I still had to use it with supervision until I got older, of course. When I was a teenager, I still had this thing, and I used to take it out for my younger brothers, but we were kind of rough with it. We would build the track up in loops and set it up on Lego bricks and erector sets and make a gain in elevation, and then have it collapse off the end with a self-destructing bridge or something, and it would plummet to the floor. But we had no regard for this thing, for its antique value, and it didn't do any damage to it. Nothing came loose, nothing got dented. Built solid. At some point I was worried that that locomotive might give up the ghost. Oh, I didn't finish my story. My dad had re-lubricated at some point, probably with Vaseline or some other stuff that was inappropriate, and it got really gunky, and it just sat there and hummed, and you had to let it sit there and cook to raise its temperature and decrease the viscosity of the lubricants before it would run. And I remembered that being a characteristic of it for most of the time I had it. Eventually I took it apart and cleaned it, soaked the parts in solvent, and then re-lubricated it with modern recommended, probably silicone-based solvents. At some point I bought this reconditioned locomotive, same motor in it, but it's a slightly different model. It doesn't have the number on the front, and it has a more streamlined set of accessories on it, and little lights up here in the corners. It's more scratched up than mine, or the original one, but then it does have the plated cab. So it's same chassis, just set up as a bit of a different model. And then at some point I bought a replacement motor that could be used on either one of them. And this is the original set of cars. There's a tanker car, Santa Fe Middle States Oil. A gondola car or hopper car, 554, Northern Pacific Yellowstone State or Yellowstone Park Line, General Coal Company. There's a box car, St. Louis Southwestern, Cotton Belt Route, 46010, with the sliding doors, both sides. There's a lot of cat hair on this. That's because I think the last time I fired this thing up, I'd taken it to a family gathering and set it up in a house that had a lot of cats in it, and there was cat hair everywhere, and a lot of it got stuck to this. I'm discovering cat hair on this all over the place. And then there's a flatbed with a little truck on it. This was always one of my favorites, and it's a dump truck. And a caboose, 556, New York Central lines. And this is a coal car or a tender car, Canadian Pacific. And I think this is the tender car that came with this other locomotive. This one, you can even see it's a different series. It doesn't have the more complicated wheel trucks on it. But at some point I acquired this and put it in here. And what's all this junk? Okay, this is some lubricating oil. I think this is actually just 3-in-1 oil. This is the lubricating grease with Teflon for use on plastics. Safe for use on plastics. I think this is what I used to lubricate it when I did that. Some cable, and boy, I forgot about this stuff. There's another lubricating oil that I'm sure I used. This is part of the transformer. And look at this, here's another motor. I forgot that I had 2 spare motors. And that was able to fit in here because even though these cardboard dividers are original, the original box wasn't much bigger than that, so I made this wooden box wider, and it had room for all this other stuff in it, therefore. And here's the, whatever you call this, it goes at the end of a dead end line. It's got a spring-loaded plate there that you can bump into, some wire bales that clasp onto the tracks, and a wire for the light that's inside of there. And then finally the transformer. I think it's time to set this up. So I've got the new track taken out, and this is the way the old one gets exposed. So yeah, it's all down there. One thing these cars have, which was more deluxe and made them a lot more fun to play with, is the automatic couplers. They're like this, and they grab onto the opposing couplers. And there are 2 little triggers on the bottom. One of them, if you trigger it, a spring pops it open. And then when you jam the coupler of the other car into it, it pushes down on here and relocks it. And then there's this other lever here, which if the car is going the other way, that can pop it open too. So that's what those 2 levers are on the bottom. And there's one special track that has a raised bar that can trigger these, And the trick is to back the train up over those sections so that the coupler levers here engage that raised section on the special track, and then immediately stop the train. The coupler will release at that point. The train will stop, but all the cars behind it will keep going from their momentum, and therefore you can uncouple cars and rearrange them and do all sorts of stuff, which is fun. Okay, I've turned on the transformer. You can hear it hum. And I only have the one side of the control panel wired up, since I only have one switch in this setup. It's the old one, and I can use the red and green to it's working fine. Now there should be some power to this. I honestly can't tell if it's doing anything. Oh, I think it's tied to track power. So I have to turn the track power on, and then we get the light there. Now, putting the train on the tracks, the tender car does not have a coupler on it, or an automatic coupler. It just has the old basic manual coupler. The idea is being the locomotive isn't going anywhere without its tender, so you don't need an automatic coupler. Now here, this one's ready and it's engaged. And I can put, oops. My recollection is that one of these was broken way back. One of the springs was missing on one of them, and the zinc casting piece here it's just swaged on, and that had come off of one of them. But at some point I fixed that. I don't remember how. I probably epoxied it or drilled a hole and put a screw in or something, and somewhere I found a appropriate spring for the one that was missing that. So all the cars should be working now. When I was a teenager, I had braces, and I had little rubber bands that were supposed to be changed daily, and until I got the replacement spring, I'd use one of those little rubber bands from the braces in place of the spring on one of these things. And finally, okay, all the cars are coupled up. So we have the siding here with a curve in it, and I'm pretty sure that I made it that way originally because I only had so much room in my bedroom when I was a teenager, and I didn't have room to keep going off in that direction, so I curved it around. I'm using all of the new straight track that I have for this layout. It's only 2 straight pieces bigger than the original layout. I don't use all of the curved pieces I have of new track, but again, except for 2 extra straight pieces, one here and one here in this layout, this is the same layout I would have used with the vintage track when I was a kid. Well, let's see if it works, huh? Squat down on the floor like I used to as a kid. But the switch is in the wrong place. And the locomotive is always reverse direction every time you power them up, so now it'll go backwards. And I have to change the switch. can tell there's some voltage drop because when it gets around here it goes a lot slower. Not all the connections in the tracks are perfect. Plus the locomotive is warming up just a little bit, so it's going a bit faster. I'm going to change the track to the switch down here. And I'm going to drop off a couple of cars. And that's because there's an uncoupler section here and one there. So one on the spur and one on the main line. Drop those off. A little bit of a loose connection there. Yeah. Oops, I'm dragging a wheel. Let's see if that helps. Now I just want to get rid of the caboose. Change the switch. The locomotive has a bit of a sticky alternating action switch in there, so it's not always shifting when it should. Hey, but the thing was made in the 40s, I think. It's pretty darn old. So I'm going to change the switch again. Whoops, I stopped at the wrong place and it's stalling on the switch. Running pretty good now. Just needed to warm up a bit. Still has a couple of spots where there's some lower voltage on sections of the track. But overall it's working pretty well. I used to love doing this when I was a kid. I'd lay on the floor right in front of the locomotive just before it would turn. Once or twice I got beamed on the forehead or the nose. Okay, so I want to swap the box car and the gondola car. So I'm going to change the switch. Get rid of that. Change the switch. Get rid of that guy. Oh, I got it stalled on the switch. I went a little bit too vigorously at that, so now I have to drop off. There we go. Oops. There we go. The other thing I used to like doing is leave the switch in the wrong position till the last second. That wasn't even close. Many a derailings happened because of that, goofing around. I think I will reenact that. It will be just a little bit too slow, hopefully. Ah, not quite enough. Ah, still too conservative. Oh, come on. Obviously, I don't have the courage I had when I was a kid. I could just leave it in the wrong position. Maybe I'll do that. Derail. Okay, back on the tracks again. A lot of voltage drop back there. And now I'm going to park it. Let's see. I didn't move the camera quick enough to capture it, but it's basically there. Now it looks to me like a couple of wheels might be off there, and maybe it's just been dragging them around. No, they're on. They just looked funny on the curve. All right. Well, I'm going to adjourn this for the moment, but I'm going to come back tonight when it's good and dark and run it in the dark. Get a little bit more of relive nostalgia out of this. What a pleasant day. Okay, I'm going to do an overview of my rolling stock. The information that I'm going to talk about regarding the cars in the original train set was all taken from Greenberg's Guide to Marx Trains. It's a 1985 publication, authored by Eric J. Matsky. It's as complete a book on Marx trains of all kinds that I'm aware of. Okay, I'm going to start with the locomotive. I have the two locomotives, but the original one was the Canadian Pacific locomotive, a very popular type. I have the 391. This whole series came with a huge number of variations because of the way the parts went together and the way they were combined in other sets. You know, everything from the wind-up versions to the, you know, all the different versions. They made the more deluxe versions, the more basic versions, and sometimes they mixed and matched the parts and you ended up with all sorts of variations. The one I have seems to be pretty much normal. Starting with the original locomotive in this set, these were all made pre-World War II. Marx had already discontinued this line pretty much by the time the World War II started and moved on to newer designs. So these were all designs from the 30s, 1930s that is, of course. So this is a locomotive known as 391. It's one of the most popular locomotives in this series. It's supposed to be Canadian Pacific, but isn't marked as such anywhere on it. There is a logo of sorts here, but that is not any kind of Canadian Pacific logo. It almost looks like a 10 turned on its side. Now, Canadian Pacific did have a shield or spade style logo, but checking on the Canadian Pacific website historical page where they show all their logos, this doesn't really resemble any of them except for the general shield or spade shape. It has a 2-4-2 wheel configuration. It has a round tin-plated stack, which is illuminated by the lamp for the headlamp, which is down below there. It's not brilliantly lit, but it does let some light out there to imply a fire, add a little bit of excitement to the toy. It has round tinned steam and sand domes. It has a shiny bell behind the stack. It has radiators on both sides on the walkway next to the boiler. The headlamp is a dotted glass lens with, of course, the single light bulb behind it. It has the punched out celluloid number 391, which is also illuminated by the single light bulb. It has 2 green marker lamps on the domed front of the boiler. This is apparently fairly unusual in all the varieties of this locomotive. Most of them had so-called ear flap style markers up on the side of the boiler just behind the dome. I always thought this looked a lot nicer. I'm glad that I have this model. That screw in the bottom, which holds the boiler dome on, is not original. The original was lost, and I just put another screw in there. This locomotive was made in 1938. And as with all of these, it has cast, I don't know what they are, zinc or something, driver wheels, and then a, I don't know if it's copper or brass or whatever it is, spring-loaded contacts for the center rail. And then the pilot wheels are on swivels. And it has the slot and groove type of coupling to the tender. There isn't any detail inside the cab. You can look straight through to the motor. But overall, a pretty nice looking locomotive. My other locomotive is a little hard to identify from Greenberg's Guide to Marx Trains. It does not match in its details any of the many varieties of the 391 locomotive. Some bits of text hint that this might be a 494, but the book does not identify any 494 features specifically. Interestingly enough, it identifies in pretty specific details all the other varieties of the 391 series, which apparently are all called 391 in general, even if they have other designations like 494 and 495 or whatever. They're all basically the same thing. Now this one I bought not as a restoration, but as an overhauled locomotive in working condition. And it's possible that whoever did that assembled a mishmash of parts from other locomotives, and that may be why it doesn't agree with anything in the Greenberg book. It has all the same stampings, it has the same side panels, same motor, same cowcatcher or whatever we want to call it on the front. However, the boiler dome is different. It has the same lamp, but it does not have a number on it like 391. It also does not have marker lights there, but it does have the ear flap marker lights, and they're missing lenses. I don't know if they ever had lenses, but that's the way those would look. I think they look kind of silly compared to the other one. It has a single stack with a teardrop shape and a red celluloid insert to make it look a little bit more like there's fire. Again, that's illuminated by the single bulb that normally operates the headlight. It doesn't have separate steam and sand domes, it only has the one, and it's also teardrop shaped. Now this one, interestingly, has a plated or chromed cab, although it's of exactly the same design as my other 391. Otherwise, on the bottom, it's exactly the same. Has the same cow catcher. It's really just in the details. Oh yes, this one also doesn't have the more elaborate handrails or piping running down the side as my regular 391 does. I'm guessing this is a slightly less deluxe version of the Locomotive, but it works just fine. The original coal tender in this set is a Type 461. It's marked Canadian Pacific. It has a black frame and body and a silver side panel with red lettering. It has the tab and slot type coupling in the front to go to the locomotive, because why would you want to uncouple the tender from the locomotive, at least automatically. And then it has the automatic coupling on the back to go to all the other cars. This is catalog number 641SB. The B suffix denotes the automatic coupler. If it didn't have the B, then it would just have the tab and slot type coupler on the rear. This model was made in 1938 and 1939. It has the embossed coal pile on the front top, and it has a very slight wedge shape to it. It's slightly wider in the front than it is in the rear. Not sure why, but maybe that's duplicating some original car. Doesn't have anything here in the front. You're not supposed to see it, apparently. It's not supposed to be a doorway. Whereas the rear, where I guess you're supposed to get a better view of it, is closed in. And it has the two four-wheel trucks. This is a tender I bought to go with my other locomotive. This is a more basic set. It's in the same series of the 6-inch set, but it's not part of the 8-wheel series, it's part of the 4-wheel series, which is slightly earlier, according to the Greenberg book, and it's also less expensive. Has two single axles, larger wheels, has the tab and slot couplers on the front and the rear. It's marked New York Central with the Marx logo behind it, Marlines. This is probably a 951. It's not marked on it anywhere. It most closely resembles the 951F in the Greenberg book, except that one should have a spotlight mounted here, and this one doesn't have the spotlight, so a little bit hard to tell. However, there are a couple slots here which maybe something could have gone into. Not really sure. Again, they made many variations on these, and the Greenberg book doesn't positively identify every possible variation. And this does have a wedge-shaped body, much more extreme than the 461 tender. Just a little cruder overall, but it would look okay. Now to the cars. All of these cars that I have are in the 6-inch 8-wheel family, which Marx introduced in 1936 to better compete with Lionel and American Flyer, their chief American competitors in O-gauge toy trains. Most of the same cars in this series were previously offered in the earlier and less expensive 6-inch 4-wheel family, such as the tender I just showed. The cars were offered in several types of couplers, including an eyelet type, the popular tab and slot, and the automatic, which in the case of the automatic had a B suffix on the model number. So I'll start with the tank car. This is a model 553. It is marked with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe railroad and the Santa Fe logo that was used for that railroad. It has a silver tank body, tin end caps, and a black frame. This variety of it was the 553B, and this model was made in the 1938 to 1941 time frame. So next up is the box car. This is model 555. It's marked in the St. Louis Northwestern, or SSW, Cotton Belt route. It has a red body, black frame. The specific catalog number is 555B, and this model again was made in the 1938 through 1941 time frame. Next is the hopper car. This is a model 554. It's marked with the Northern Pacific, Yellowstone Park Line, and General Coal Company. It has, instead of red, it has the luxurious vermilion exterior with what they call a yellow interior, and that just means the inside of the hopper, and also things like the interfacing sides of the ladders. Has yellow lettering and a black frame. The specific model number for this is 554B. Next is a flat car with a dump truck. It appears that only one or two varieties of this car were made. It is the car with the fewest options shown in the Greenberg book. It's a model 562 with the black rail car frame. And by the way, this is the same frame that all the other cars use. They were cleverly designed so they could always use common parts. The thing that really distinguishes it is the truck that goes on it and the black spring clips which affix the truck to the rail car frame. The truck is a red body with a blue dumper. And the design of the truck closely resembles other stamped steel toy trucks made by Marx and probably some other companies in that same time frame. Specifically, this is catalog number 562B. And again, it was in the 1938 to 1941 time frame. The next car in my lineup, and the last one, is model 556. This is a caboose marked with the New York Central and the Marx logo. It has a black frame and a red body. One of the distinguishing features is it has the cupola on it with 3 windows on each side that's just painted on, and 2 windows on the front and rear. Not all of the varieties had that. They did make versions with and without the Marx logo. This one obviously has it. The specific catalog number is 556B, and again 1938 to 1941. To further illustrate how the decouplers or automatic couplers work, I'm going to manually manipulate the train here. Here's the decoupling track, and it has this raised phenolic bar here, which is on springs. So if the paddles underneath the cars come by in the other direction, this just pushes down to let them go over. But if it hits it going the other way, then it pushes up on those paddles and temporarily releases the lock on the coupling while it goes over this. And if you stop train direction at just that moment, or at least decelerate it, then it will let loose. So there we go. And then to recouple them, you just back up somewhere where there isn't those paddles. Oops, that decoupled, that decoupled. Now we're back in good shape.